In the pages of history, the Vietnam War appears as a long, grinding stretch of time spanning 2 decades. For those who fought in it, however, it was not merely the passage of years marked by blood and tears, but thousands of consecutive days lived under constant strain. Days were torn apart by artillery fire, helicopters, and endless patrols. Nights grew dense with anxiety, when even the slightest unfamiliar sound was enough to pull nerves tight as drawn wire. For many American soldiers, the war clung to them throughout their entire time in Vietnam, seeping into every road they were forced to travel. Where life and death were sometimes separated by only a hand's breadth, and where despair set in because no one could be sure they would live to see the next morning. In this unfamiliar land, American soldiers confronted everything they had never known before. A hot, humid climate, unforgiving terrain, disease, and an enemy who never appeared at the time or in the manner they expected, creating a constant sense of being hunted. Within this broader picture, overland supply routes became places where all risks converged. They were the arteries that sustained the entire machinery of war. Ammunition, fuel, food, reinforcements, everything had to pass through these narrow corridors. What unfolded along these roads reflected the true nature of the conflict. From the harsh central highlands, through the main axes of movement in southeastern Vietnam, to the unstable regions near the demilitarized zone, each area presented its own terrain and its own dangers. Yet they all shared one thing in common. They tested the limits of human endurance. And behind it all lay the enemy's silent logistical network, an element that ensured every American attempt to control space remained under unrelenting tension, stretching all the way to the final days of the war. One of the most significant of these routes was National Route 19. This narrow strip of asphalt played a vital role in the entire Central Highlands theater. From the coastal ports of central Vietnam, it climbed steadily into the highlands, crossing dry mountain ranges, winding mountain passes, and dense jungles to sustain American and South Vietnamese bases in Pleiku and Con Tum before extending toward the Cambodian border. More than a critical transportation artery, Route 19 was a deadly corridor filled with traps. From the very first kilometers leaving the coast, the road revealed its treacherous nature. Pass followed pass. The roadway constricted and steep, visibility shattered by sharp curves and sheer mountainsides. Heavily laden military trucks had to crawl upward meter by meter, sometimes advancing only a few kilometers an hour. On both sides lay thick forest and deep valleys, perfect terrain for ambush. The wind howled through mountain gaps like whispered warnings, reminders that this land had swallowed entire armies before. Its past alone was enough to chill any soldier to the bone. Before the Americans ever arrived, it had been the grave of a French battle group in 1954, nearly annihilated in a devastating ambush near one of the passes. When the Americans chose to fight here, the traces of that past were still visible. Abandoned wrecks, rusting metal, and stories passed from soldier to soldier. For many drivers, it was the ghost road. From the very first day, a place already soaked in blood and seemingly always waiting to be fed more. From the Vietnamese side, this road was seen as an ideal target for severing the Central Highlands from the coast, forcing the Americans and their allies to pay a heavy price if they wished to keep it open. Road clearing and security forces repeatedly ran into ambushes. A major engagement in mid-1965 made the danger unmistakably clear. A relief force advancing westward was stopped in dense jungle, its formation split in two, with enemy fire both in front and to the rear. Only through the use of artillery, armed helicopters, and continuous air support throughout the night were they able to hold their positions and withdraw in an orderly manner. Officers who were present witnessed firsthand the enemy's tight organization and formidable ability to exploit the terrain, an impression that did not fade easily. Over the next 2 years, the level of danger did not diminish. The rugged terrain turned supply convoys into ideal targets for mines and ambush fire. One short stretch of road lined with thick vegetation was given a chilling nickname by the troops: Ambush Alley. The familiar scenario played out again and again. A deafening explosion flipped the lead vehicle, smoke and dust blanketed the roadway, and gunfire poured in from the depths of the forest. In the first seconds of chaos, drivers and escort troops had to leap from their vehicles and dive into roadside ditches to return fire. There were no trenches or defensive lines, only an exposed strip of asphalt and two deadly walls of green. To survive, the army was forced to adapt. Gun trucks emerged, cargo trucks crudely armored with steel plating, mounting heavy machine guns or automatic weapons on their beds, ready to surge forward when a convoy came under attack. They were painted with aggressive designs and carried intimidating names meant to bolster morale. Convoy formations were reorganized as well. Spacing was adjusted, movement concentrated in daylight, and long stretches were pushed through in a single run before pulling back quickly ahead of nightfall. Each morning began with mine clearing, a grueling contest of wits, since it was nearly impossible to clear even a short section and keep it safe for long. Absolute safety, of course, never existed. There were American officers who bravely turned their vehicles around and drove straight back into ambush zones to pull comrades out of danger, paying for that courage with their lives. Such stories made it clear to the troops that this road was not a low-risk logistical assignment, but a genuine front line. By the late 1960s, stronger firepower and dense escort systems reduced losses along the route. Yet fighting remained constant and persistent. As American forces gradually withdrew and responsibility was handed over to South Vietnamese units, pressure from the opposing side increased noticeably. By the early 1970s, the supply line that had been held with blood and steel steadily lost its ability to be defended and was finally severed during the last major campaigns. The consequence was not merely military defeat, but a cascading collapse of an entire strategic region. If National Route 19 was a symbol of fear in the Central Highlands, then National Route 13 was the vital nerve linking Saigon to southeastern Vietnam. This road ran straight north, cutting through vast rubber plantations and tactical areas notorious for their dense networks of bunkers and tunnels. During the war, it served as the backbone connecting the South's wartime capital to a chain of key bases, Lai Khe, Chon Than, and Loc Loc, Ninh, before reaching toward the Cambodian border. On both sides stretched orderly rows of rubber trees interspersed with dense jungle, at times severely limiting visibility with vegetation and low-lying terrain. American troops gave this axis a grim nickname: Thunder Road. The name came from the sudden crack of mines, the whoosh of RPG tearing through the air, or machine gun fire sweeping across the pavement, along with the sensation of being struck from nowhere. Beginning in 1965, the U.S. 1st Infantry Division bore much of the responsibility for securing the southern stretch of the route. They arrived with advantages in many respects over their opponent, but quickly learned that those advantages did not automatically translate into safety. There were days when the road was so quiet it felt suffocating, convoys moving silently beneath motionless canopies of trees. And when gunfire erupted, everything changed within seconds. Smoke billowed. The acrid smell of burning filled the air, and harsh, concussive sounds slammed into the ears of men thrown into sudden panic. What followed was a grinding accumulation of exhaustion: small ambushes, roadside mines, sniper fire, blown bridges, actions that did not always inflict heavy losses, but repeated often enough to create constant disruption. To counter this, the Americans turned traveling the road into a complex military ritual. Engineers swept for mines, armored vehicles escorted convoys, infantry secured key points, and fire support bases were positioned along the axis to maintain continuous pressure. After the Tet Offensive of 1968, Thunder Road felt more like a cable pulled taut to the breaking point. Interdiction attacks intensified. There were battles in which survival hinged on tactical reflexes during the first few dozen seconds. forming defensive perimeters around disabled vehicles, dragging wounded men out under fire, maintaining communications while waiting for reinforcements. These were painful lessons learned in blood experiences many veterans would later wish they could forget entirely. By 1972, the route was completely severed, turning Anlock into an isolated fortress. With the road no longer usable, air resupply became mandatory. Everything unfolded under conditions that were uncertain and brutally difficult. Wounded men and ammunition, dropped by parachute under heavy fire, strategic bombing runs, shaking the forests around the town to prevent the enemy from tightening the siege. It was, in many ways, the line between survival and collapse. And in the north, National Route 9 presented yet another face of the war. This road cuts across Quang Tri Province, running from the coastal lowlands straight into the Trong Son Mountains and reaching the Laotian border. It lay close to the dividing parallel, close enough that any upheaval in the demilitarized zone could ripple down almost immediately. In theory, holding this axis meant creating a transverse barrier shielding the southern flank of the DMZ, while also threatening infiltration routes through Laos. In reality, the terrain the road traversed seemed designed to shatter every notion of control. Dense jungle, steep slopes, persistent fog, and countless choke points. The Americans established a chain of bases and fire support positions along the route, treating it as the logistical lifeline, connecting rear areas to the forward edge. In practice, however, that lifeline was frequently severed. A single cut was enough to turn Western outposts into isolated islands, forced to survive on air supply alone. The greatest fear associated with this route bore a name: Khe Sanh. In early 1968, when the base was encircled, the ground route blocked. Memories of Dien Bien Phu became a tangible obsession within the military psyche. For weeks on end, Khe Sanh existed in a state of enclosure, sustained by deep trenches, earthen bunkers, and the hope of aerial resupply. Psychological pressure permeated every guard shift, as soldiers listened to shells shrieking overhead, felt earth and debris raining down onto bunker roofs, and endured the sudden silences between barrages. For the U.S. Army and Marine Corps troops stationed there, time was no longer measured in days or hours, but in artillery strikes and the number of wounded carried back to the field aid station. Many tried to preserve their sanity through dark humor, scribbling hurried messages on helmets or body armor as a way to fend off the creeping sense of hopelessness. That unease intensified sharply when a nearby outpost was overrun in a night assault. The enemy's deployment of light tanks was not only a tactical shock, but a psychological blow as well. It shattered the assumption that this area could be threatened only by infantry and conventional artillery. From within Khe Sanh, the flashes and explosions echoing from the west looked like signals that the ring was tightening. In such circumstances, American commanders had to suppress the instinct to rush out in a ground relief effort, knowing that even a single rescue column venturing beyond the perimeter in that terrain could be crushed swiftly. To break the isolation, the United States launched a large-scale combined arms operation to reopen the ground route. Marine units advanced along the road axis, engineers clinging to every meter to clear mines, fill craters, and reinforce bridges, while air-mobile forces seized key terrain, dismantling blocking positions along the ridgelines. It was an approach that bore the hallmark of an elite military, reliant on speed, firepower, and tight coordination between infantry, air power, and engineers. The operation achieved its immediate goal. The road was reopened, and the psychological pressure smothering the base was lifted. The specter of a catastrophe, reminiscent of earlier Indochina wars, was pushed back. Yet holding a base so vulnerable to isolation meant a prolonged war of attrition, where each additional day of existence demanded enormous resources. Only months later, the Americans voluntarily abandoned Khe Sanh. This decision was not an admission of defeat on the battlefield, but the outcome of a strategic calculation. There are places which, even if they can be defended and carry symbolic weight, are ultimately not worth holding indefinitely in a brutal war that exacts an even higher price elsewhere. But National Route 9 was not finished with those who sought to impose control over it. In 1971, the road once again became the backbone of a far greater gamble, this time extending beyond the border. During the offensive into the enemy's logistical rear areas inside Laos, U.S. ground troops did not cross the frontier directly. Yet American involvement proved decisive through helicopters, firepower, and the entire logistical system. Khe Sanh was reactivated as a forward staging base. The road was hastily restored. Pontoon bridges were thrown up, and bypass routes were opened to increase mobility. The reality of the battlefield quickly revealed how punishing that choice was. Dense air defenses, heavy artillery, and enemy forces stronger than anticipated turned the western skies into a killing zone for even the most experienced pilots. Every resupply or medical evacuation flight meant charging headlong into a wall of fire. Helicopters returned riddled with holes, troop compartments smeared with blood, crews exhausted both physically and mentally. When the withdrawal descended into chaos, images of soldiers clinging to helicopter skids became a painful symbol of the price paid for a strategic gamble that fell short. Looking back at these three axes from the Central Highlands, through the southeast, to the demilitarized frontier, one undeniable commonality emerges. No matter how they were controlled, and no matter how enormous the resources spent to keep them open, the United States and its allies were always under a quiet but relentless pressure. One generated by a system of warfare operating on a logic fundamentally different from their own mechanized mindset. While American strategy focused on major transportation arteries where convoys, armor, and mobile forces could exploit their strengths, the opposing side relied on a spatial network that rarely appeared on tactical maps. The trail system running along the Truong Son Range, extending through Laos and Cambodia, was not a single road, but an entire living logistical structure. Footpaths, bicycle routes, river crossings, field depots, rest stations, and air defense sites all concealed beneath the forest canopy. For the Americans, this was a deeply unsettling paradox. They could seize the paved highways, yet they could not see or control what truly sustained their opponent. It was not for lack of effort. The United States committed immense resources to destroying this network. Millions of tons of bombs dropped along the Truong Son Range, forests defoliated by chemical agents, electronic sensor systems scattered to detect movement at night. On operational maps, these areas became constant fire coordinates. Yet battlefield reality exposed a cold truth. The logistical flow was damaged, disrupted, but never completely severed. The enemy repaired roads at night, opened detours when needed, and accepted losses to keep the flow moving. And it was precisely this fact that generated a simmering sense of impotence, the inability to lock the war down decisively. As a result, these national highways never truly fulfilled their mission as envisioned. They existed in a perpetual state of being held, defended, and retaken. American forces were compelled to stretch themselves thin, protecting corridors hundreds of kilometers long, while their opponent needed only to choose the right moment and place to apply pressure. It was a war of attrition in the truest sense, with both sides exhausted and constantly straining to endure. In this light, those roads were not merely military locations. They became symbols of the very nature of the Vietnam War, and the experiences along them turned the roads into a bitter metaphor for America's journey in Vietnam. The deeper one advanced, the more threatening the dangers became. The desire to withdraw, and on those very roads, that answer became clearer than anywhere else. Those roads still lie there, unchanged on the map. But what the Americans failed to hold was not the pavement itself, but its meaning. In a war where the enemy did not live by paved highways, occupying them was never the answer. And that is the bitterest lesson history left behind, written into every kilometer of road.